you have already met your chair. The chair is Pipo Serrano. And for this high-level roundtable, we are asking how technology can help push inclusion. Your chair, Pipo Serrano, who will bring on his speakers. Please make them feel very welcome.
They're getting into the yard. Not the house, they came out the house, they're coming from the yard. Come over here. Jeff, thanks. Thank you very much to all of you. Hi, Carlo, how are you doing? Great. Good over there? Let me see, someone is going to kill me because I'm moving this, but I want to see Carlo, I want to see everyone. Thanks to all of you for being here. Well, this session, as you know, it's called When Technology Becomes a Push for Inclusion. And when thinking about this, I was thinking that the digital transition can be a force that transforms cities for better. And we do that by ensuring agile digital services for all citizens. And I don't know if this is me or not. Is this my mic? Hope not. I was saying ensuring agile digital services for all citizens and facilitating accessibility of new technological tools. But these advantages need to be implemented with inclusivity at the core. And that's key. With every step, we need to make sure that the digital gaps are lowered, that civil rights are ensured, and that data is used ethically. And when thinking on some elements that I think we talked about that with Jeff a year ago or 2 years ago, I don't know because this before and after COVID kills me. But according to the OECD, by 2050, 70% of the total global population will live in cities. And by then, the world population is expected to be 9 billion people. So that means that if we don't have that on mind, our society is kind of at risk. Because basically this is about technologies, deployments, ethics, regulation, but above all, about people. And this is a bit what we were talking in the previous session. So transforming for and with the people. And that's kind of so key. But I feel that lately, after some years talking about technology and how to make the city efficient, we start to talk much more about the people. And that kind of, it's quite interesting. So we can talk more, instead of smart cities, about smart human cities, sensible cities, or sensible cities, as Carlo brings and he will share. And we do it with an amount of experts which are great. So today we have with us Jeff Merrit. He's the head of urban transformation at the World Economic Forum. We have Nuria Oliver, who's director and co-founder at ELLIS Unit Alicante Foundation in Alicante. We've got Miss Jeanne Holm. She's the deputy mayor of the city of Los Angeles. And we've got also Nerea Luis, artificial intelligence lead at TechFest. And finally, over there, hello, Carlo, Ratti. He's architect and director of the MIT Senseable City Lab. So the first thing I would love to is if you can introduce yourself and give us a flavor on your perspective about this topic so that people can realize a bit how do you address and tackle these issues from your positions.
Sure. I lead up all of the World Economic Forum's work on cities and urban transformation, and at the core what that means is really mobilizing the private sector to work hand in hand with governments to help build communities that are more equitable, sustainable, resilient. But I think my perspective is in many ways shaped by the fact that I spent most of my life in New York City, a city where the majority of the population is foreign-born, where more than 200 languages are spoken, and so you can't do anything in New York without putting inclusion front and center. So that is, in many ways, sort of the point of view that I'm going to come from today.
Great, Nuria, what's your?
Hi, good morning. Yeah.
Good morning.
So my perspective is on the intersection between humans and artificial intelligence. I've worked for over 25 years on exploring how artificial intelligence can be a driver for social good and how we can make sure that the impact of artificial intelligence will be positive on our societies. And of course, inclusion is necessary if we want such an impact to be positive.
Definitely. Thank you. Ms. Jeanne, how do you see it?
So I think that part of this whole inclusion is really about the people who are on your data teams, the data scientists, the policymakers, that they're as diverse as the population that you serve, to make sure that you have different voices helping to create the algorithms and data selection to make better and more equitable policies, better and more equitable services, and most importantly, equitable opportunities for people to advance and get access to services. So we work a lot with 5G, telecommunication companies, public-private partnerships, universities to bring opportunities into our poorest neighborhoods.
Interesting. Thank you. Nerea,
Yes. So in my case,
we cannot hear you.
Okay,
Let me see.
right now. So I'm the artificial intelligence team leader at Singular, and from that, what I learned and what I'm really most thoughtful to fight for is private and public collaborations through technology. So I'm a technician, and I have lived all these artificial intelligence new wave. We have a lot of responsibility from the technical side. And I want to bring that to the table in order to collaborate with other stakeholders, whether it is on smart cities use cases or fully AI responsibility. So these are my interesting.
Sounds interesting. Carlo.
Yeah, and hi, Carlo Ratti, so I direct Senseable City Lab at MIT. Senseable for us is a city that's senseable, but also able to sense and sensible, so playing on the two words. And one of the key things is that, well, you know, there's no AI without data. And today, cities are flush with data. There's a huge amount of data describing dimensions of cities we couldn't even understand before. And so I think when you talk about inclusion, one interesting thing is see how data can help us better understand, you know, issues with inclusion, segregation in cities, what we call liminal ghettos. You know, ghettos, not traditional ghettos that were visible, but it's kind of invisible fault lines in our cities. And so data can help us understand them, and once we got a better grasp on such issues, then we can then design better cities and improve them. So that's what we are passionate about.
Let me start with you, and I will invite you to stop me at any moment, ask, answer. I mean, this doesn't have to be a boring thing that I ask one after one and after one and after one. So if you want to bring anything, bring it. And the same to you. If you want to bring something, get into the mics. If I can, we'll get into like in between the session, and if not at the end of it. But I will try to make this a bit enjoyable. So, Carlo, you were saying about the sensitive or sensible city and these things. How do you make that work in terms of, and you can all tell me, maybe also Jeanne and Jeff know a lot about this, how do you connect the professionals? Because the perspective sometimes is the technical guys come and they bring a smart city. But there are some others in the city that know very well the people and the ghettos, as you were saying, or whatever, many other things. How do you connect those professionals to understand that this has to be holistic?
Yeah, and well, I think, you know, the key important thing is, I think is to create as many feedback loops as possible. And feedback loops means feedback loops with the citizens, feedback loops with the design team, between public and private. So that's really what happens in nature. You know, you get feedback loops and you learn from that and you use it as a way to improve the process. And I think the same thing we can do, especially with data and AI in our cities today.
Good.
I think another important factor, and I can speak from our experience during COVID-19, where we work very closely with public officials and politicians to inform more data-driven, evidence-driven policymaking during the pandemic. I think it's absolutely necessary that there are advocates in the public sector, in the public administrations, that really believe in the power of using data and technology to support policymaking. And our project wouldn't have been successful if we hadn't had such a huge commitment from the public officials, from politicians in doing something like this. So achieving multidisciplinary, multi-institutional, successful collaborations, I think is absolutely key to turn this into a positive reality.
That's interesting. I don't know if Jeanne or Jeff, when you were leading the transformation in New York City, or Jeanne in LA, if you really make some, I don't know, some menstrual meetings once a month or a weekly or whatever with your team so that they talk each other. And come on, let's look at as we were saying in the previous session, let's look at our client, our customer, at the people. How do we treat them better? How do we address them in a better way? Do you have that experiences?
Yeah, I think there's two examples. One is, like many of you during the pandemic, we wanted to bring more services online. So we held 50 community meetings with people who are homeless, immigrants, people in poverty, to really understand how the people we might have been leaving behind would interact with online services, and we discovered all kinds of new things. We discovered they didn't have access to banking, so they couldn't pay their bills online. They didn't have computers, so we gave away computers. We brought banking services to the poor. So by having those community meetings in an ongoing way, it's been really helpful. And the second one is around environmental justice. So we know areas in the city where we have pollution particularly, but we don't have sensors all over the city. So we're doing a project with NASA using machine learning and artificial intelligence, combining satellite data with ground data sensors to predict air quality and give that information to people in really useful ways. But it doesn't come from the city, it goes to their physicians and doctors, and then to the people suffering asthma.
Okay, interesting. How do you see that, Tev?
Well, one thing I think it's important to acknowledge is that there's a particular challenge to try and make technologists more sort of human-centric and inclusive. And what I mean by this is that in some ways there's a natural selection. The individuals that select careers in technology and engineering, they tend to be a little more introverted, right? And that very quickly that it's easy to become a bit obsessed with the technology as creating all of these new opportunities, and that we need to always be reminding ourselves, and I think it takes a lot of work to help technologists understand that technology by default creates inequality. And what I mean by that is at the core, technology does not grow on trees. You have to purchase it, right? And therefore, individuals, organizations with resources are going to open themselves up to new opportunities, new efficiencies. And therefore, if we are not proactive in making sure that every step of the way that we are finding a way to push technology to those individuals who might not have the resources, who might not, for one reason or the other, proactively seek out and engage in technology, we're going to continue to have greater and greater equity. So I simply make that point to say that it takes a lot of extra effort to ensure that technologists are focusing on inclusion and equity, because they are naturally pushing opportunities, and those opportunities are going to be taken in by individuals who have more resources.
Yeah, and I read something that Nerea was saying in some interview some weeks ago, I think, very connected to something that reminds me to that technologies that are pushed are from private companies many times, that make the city advance in a rapid way, but we need to control a bit that, no, Nerea?
Yeah, there's a need right now to work into different profiles, different backgrounds. So what I saw, my first experience that I got, a real experience, was through a focus group that was organized by Digital Future Society during the pandemic here in Barcelona. We were all remote, and I remember that our topic was, well, you are just going to propose a solution for a public administration that wants to run some social call to give some credit for people that needs that. So the idea was, what if computer says no? What if you have an artificial intelligence or a decision-making system that says you are not allowed for that credit, and you are a public government, right? So that situation put us directly into the citizen perspective, because we are all citizens and we all can face those situations, whether I'm a technician or I'm whatever, something else. So when I was involved into that project, even though it was just to depict some solution, it gave me a glimpse of what technology is going to be from now on. So since that moment, which was in 2020, I have been involved into several projects or contributions that tries to enable technicians to work into social problems that might arise from government collaborations, public collaborations in general. And I met also some other organization called ELLIS that it's also very aware of the ethical issues that algorithms have. And the idea is to put all our knowledge out there, whether if they come from social scientists or myself, that I come from artificial.
It makes a lot of sense. And this reminds me again that even we think that pandemic is over, we all still mentioning things that happened during the pandemic, because there are parts that we learned from that. And I read another article from Carlo, which was so interesting. I think it was at the Boston Globe or something like that, in where you were talking about how the lockdown affected to all of us in terms of, we initially thought, okay, teleworking is great, and but many other things happened behind.
Yeah, and well, we were all a little bit surprised, kind of a couple of years ago, when everybody was saying, cities are dead, we don't need offices, Twitter for one. 2 years ago said, employees can work from home forever. Very different from what Elon Musk said just a couple of days ago. But basically 2 years ago, this was the prevailing narrative. And so what we said, well, instead of having this debate about just, is this the end of the city? It's not certainly, just based on that conversation, can we actually look at data, as we are saying today, and look at, what are the consequences, for instance, if we don't meet in person in the office? And it turns out that just before COVID, we were collecting on the MIT campus a lot of data about the social networks of the MIT campus. And then, what happened with COVID, with all the tragedy, was kind of the experiment that normally you can never do in the social sciences, which is you take one variable, in this case physical space, and you remove it, and you see what happens to the network. And going back to what you were saying, yes, that's it's an article in Nature Computational Science, and I did a small op-ed in the Boston Globe. But basically, the finding is that, I'll give it in a nutshell, but unless we meet in physical space, our social networks suffer a lot, especially what are called weak ties. Weak ties are very important for creativity. They're not friends of our friends, the people very close to us, but they're basically connection that expose us to new ideas, to diversity, and so on. Well, all of them disappear unless we meet in physical space. I think the magic that's happening here at the Congress is an example of that. But the same thing is what happened during the pandemic in reverse, when the lack of physical interaction actually took a big toll on our social networks.
It's super interesting. I mean, you need to read it about those, I think you call it weak ties and close ties and how...
Yeah, and it's not our definition. That it goes back, if somebody's interested, to a very important papers in 1973 by Mark Granovetter, who defined weak ties and strong ties.
Yeah.
Strong ties are basically friends, who are also friends of other friends. So basically, if you draw them, you see a triangle on a piece of paper. And weak ties are just, usually what sociologists say, bridges to another community. But the important finding initially by Granovetter was that weak ties are so important in order, to expose us to diversity, to new idea, and to challenge our preconceptions.
It's super interesting. The same way I was thinking when asking to Nerea about these private companies that also need to work and need to help on the cities, because sometimes we think, oh, private company. But well, I mean, this thing is about working together, private and public, right? During the pandemic, just thinking on that, there are lots of city services that are provided by private companies. And I presume that from, I don't know if from World Economic Forum or something, you were trying to help them to keep on with their businesses, because that also helps citizens and that also helps cities and all those things. How do you tackle that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think when we look at the casualties and the harms of this pandemic, right, we see that not only is it low-income residents around the world, but it's small and medium-sized enterprises. And part of this, in both scenarios, what you have is that you have individuals that live paycheck to paycheck, or, in terms of small companies that are planning on very, very short time horizons, have limited sort of in-house capacity, technical expertise. And so the pandemic, when we saw this sort of push that you had no choice but in many cases to adopt technology, to be able to move activities remote, that these small and medium-sized enterprises, a lot of them really, really suffered. And I'm not just talking about the mom and pop retail stores in central business districts and restaurants and that type of thing that suffered from the lack of customers, but we're also talking about the companies that are driving a lot of supply chains and a lot of the behind the scenes, activities that make our lives possible. And that what we have been focused on, one of the things at the World Economic Forum, is how can we really ease that transition, that modernization for these companies. And we initially started working with Brazil, and we started out in the state of Sao Paulo working with a lot of sort of auto parts manufacturers and aerospace manufacturing companies, but small companies in those supply chains. Initially rolled it out with 1,000 companies a couple years ago. That's now expanded into a national program across Brazil where we're really mobilizing public sector resources and building together networks, again, to provide those finances that are needed to make those critical investments, to modernize those companies, but then also the technical expertise, the professional networks that are also so key. And then now I'm happy to say that that work has expanded globally and now includes a network including South Africa and Saudi Arabia and Kazakhstan and Turkey and a number of countries that are all working together to really make sure that when we're looking to a future that is filled with instability, that we're recognizing the most vulnerable, and those are not only individuals, but those are small businesses and organizations as well who need our support.
That's interesting. I was thinking that this session is called When Technology Becomes a Push for Inclusion, and I don't know if you listened to the previous guest that we had in the previous session. He was a chef. So I would like to ask you for a favor. Can you help me with the recipe? I would like to bring some ingredients to make a city inclusive. So I don't know if we can play a bit, and probably each of you can help me in different ways, different angles. So for example, if we get, for instance, data and security, that would be an important angle that we should pay attention to. And thinking on, for example, how to address to those neighbors who are digitally invisible. I don't know, Jeanne, how do you do that from LA? How do you tackle certain decisions if they're invisible? How do you learn from that part of your neighbors that sometimes don't have connection or they don't have the skills and those things?
So I slightly disagree with some of the things said earlier, actually. I think that during the pandemic, some of these ties have become stronger because we've formed ties with people within our own neighborhoods. So community organizations, civil society, that people who are on our teams at the city, but they live in a neighborhood, those connections have become stronger because otherwise we tended to isolate at City Hall. Mm-hmm. So I think it's been interesting to watch that. But what we do is we actually go into the communities. We listen to what people are saying. We listen to their challenges. And we just started a new incubator, for example, in one of our most poor neighborhoods, South Los Angeles, very digitally divided. And we've recruited 15 young entrepreneurs, all minorities from that neighborhood, some of whom have never done a business before, one who's just come out of homelessness. And they're creating digitally divided entrepreneurships. So cybersecurity, helping small businesses, working in the metaverse, that's a different conversation. And so the idea—
Don't tell that to Jeff.
I know, we've had this conversation. But the idea is let them come up with their own ideas and nurture them and support them. The same way Jeff was talking about helping regular businesses, help these new entrepreneurs to be able to break the digital divide.
Interesting. I don't know, Nuria, and you about data and security, you know a lot. And from what you do probably at ELLIS unit in Alicante Foundation, is there any other tip related to algorithms based on data that could help the policymakers, the decision makers for cities, something that can help to manage it properly?
Yeah, I mean, I think connecting with the previous question, I think a very valuable approach to really be more inclusive in terms of the data collection is applying mixed methods. The first step is to understand the limitations of your own data, to realize that indeed there might be people that are invisible or situations that are invisible. And then usually address those by having other approaches to connect with those realities. In many cases, these analog traditional approaches, it could be, physically, connecting with those individuals or communities, doing like manual surveys and so forth, with the understanding that it's going to be complementing, other sources of data. The other very important element, which is one of the topics that we work on, is biases and potential discriminatory decisions that might be made from models that have been trained with, among other reasons, data that might be biased. And this has been shown in many different fields, from judicial sentences to credits, granting credits, or university admissions. So there is a very fertile research area that we, among many other people, work on, which is the area of algorithmic fairness. How can we ensure that we have guarantees for fairness in the algorithms that we build? Another important area, of course, is privacy. There is always the trade-off between being able to make data-driven, informed decisions and the implications that there might be on individuals' privacy. So we are also working on some of the latest approaches to privacy-preserving machine learning, such as federated learning, for example, where the data never leaves wherever it is, so it's 100% private, and you're able to learn a global, high-performing model from distributed data without ever seeing the data. And that's quite powerful in terms of preserving privacy. And then the last point that I think is very important is transparency and control. So I think we as citizens, everyone, should know what data is being collected about them, what the data is being used for, and should have the control over it, should have the power to decide whether they want or they don't want to have their data being used.
Clearly. I hope that we have all learned a lot from the ADMS, the automated decision-making systems that perform some crazy situations in many places. Nerea, I was thinking that you also, maybe you can bring us some other recommendations for Jeanne or for other cities and policymakers or decision makers, because you also worked a lot about underrepresented. How can you address that?
Yes, so underrepresentation has been a problem historically, but we just realize now, because these AI systems, it's like they put us a mirror in front of us, and now we are able to see things that were maybe a little bit hidden. So getting into what Nuria was saying, once you have your algorithm and your model ready to work, and you have supervised all these data quality, bias, and so on, there's a moment when you have to put it in production. That means real environment. And when you reach that point, is the point when you start to realize, okay, there are maybe some other things that I didn't have into account, because in my laboratory system or the environment that I created was not 100% real, of course. So that's one of the key points that I think we are going to face from now on. So there will be social issues, there will be data issues. Some of them can be solved with data protection, also privacy, data governance. There were some others that can be solved with federated learning architectures, as Nuria was saying. But there will be some others that can only be solved with what we call human in the loop. So that means putting people to test all these algorithms in the real environment and to gather all that data and retrain all that models without moving that model back again into the laboratory status. So that's something that I'm pretty interested into working these years, which is called, well, machine learning operations and the data lifecycle.
We were talking about data and security, quite clear, one ingredient. There's another one which would be digitalization and technology. Carlo, I was thinking, and you maybe can help me on that, 2 days ago, I think it was on Tuesday, I was interviewing in this stage Liz Diller. She's an architect. You probably know her because she performed the High Line in New York, the reform on the MoMA, the Shed, and many others. And we didn't talk on that in the stage, but she explained to me before that Spike Jonze called her so that she could help her to draw, to imagine a dystopic city. When talking about digitalization and technology, there are several things. One part is the infrastructure, and you, as a person who can design and understand cities, maybe you can help us. The other one is about understanding how people is connected to that, or if they are, so having some service. And then there is a third one that could be literacy, so teaching them. How do you envision that? How do you work on that?
Yeah, and I'll go back to something that was mentioned before, which is the very important thing to be transparent, and then through that to engage different communities. Because the reality, we heard it, there's many issues. We're not even aware of all the issues, of all the biases in the data, issues with the technology, biases in AI, and all of that. So really, the only way we can do this is by making the process as transparent as possible so we can constantly, open it up for scrutiny, for people to provide feedback, and also get to solutions that might be different in different places. Again, Nuria was saying about different ways to do privacy preserving, but you can preserve different level of privacy, and different communities might be demanding different type of level. So again, to me, the key important thing you said before, what are the three most important things? I would say it's always the same three. It's people, people, and people. And that's about how we can engage them through feedback loops. Again, you're making things as open as possible and get return from really the people who need to decide and make decisions here.
That's great. And how do you make that? Because you've got some responsibility for that, and we can ask you to help small and medium cities. Sometimes we talk about smart cities and we all think about the big cities, but there are many other cities. There's many more people living out that. How do you help, if you do it, to small to medium cities, on the digital divide, on all these elements?
Yeah, well, I want to riff quickly off of this sort of metaphor of a recipe, because I think it's a really interesting one, and that it has to be a recipe for what I have a dear friend, Victor Panetta, who's here, he calls radical inclusion, right? The idea that accessibility is a mandatory ingredient in that recipe. And when you think about foods, right, a lot of foods people can't eat. They have a gluten allergy or allergic to this or that. And so how do we actually create technology that is truly accessible to all? That is radical inclusion, right? And that requires one, we have to start at the point in which obviously we've talked a lot about how we design the technology, but then also what are the expectations for when we purchase technology, right? And that ultimately we need to set a norm here that not only when governments purchase technology, but when organizations and corporations purchase technology, that technology has to be accessible to all. That it needs to be, and that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, but that's easy to say.
Easier to say than do, but you need to be thinking about all of your neighbors, all of those individuals and their unique needs, and how do you make that technology accessible, and that burden should fall on the technology designers to think about how do you make that accessible. And so one of the key things that we've been doing through our G20 Global Smart City Alliance is advancing a global procurement norm. And I know procurement isn't a sexy thing, but it's really about how you buy technology and the expectations you put on the suppliers of technology and the developers. And it's not very complicated. It basically says when you put out a request for proposals that the technology vendor has to indicate how that technology would able to be accessed by people that have a lot of different abilities, people that might be aging or born without sight, or have limitations to their physical abilities, etc. Right? And if you design for radical inclusion, then you ensure that recipe becomes something that everybody can enjoy, right? And that is a sort of core value that we need to really spread far and wide. This is not something just for governments to do, it's for all of us to be ensuring that we are producing products, services, value that everybody can partake in.
Yeah, but you were saying something interesting that maybe Jeanne can help us to see how they do it in the city, but there are some people who probably are very far from that technology. How do you create that literacy program so that those older or younger or whatever, underrepresented, can learn and connect to the city, to the services, and have the same opportunities?
So I think there's again, it's about the people on the team. So you want to have as diverse a team with different backgrounds, different lived experiences. One of the things we did for everybody in Los Angeles City Hall, 56,000 employees, is we put them through implicit bias training. Not that it's bad to have a bias, but it's important to know what your biases are. So, for example, I love animals, but I love dogs more than cats. I just have to be honest. But I also oversee the budget for animal services in the zoo. It's important that I know that bias, just so I'm aware of it. So we look at the implicit bias training, we make people aware, and then we have a digital code of ethics that applies to everybody, including our vendors on our procurement platform and our own development team, that says anybody in the development process, anybody in the public, has a right and a responsibility to call out algorithmic bias, data selection bias, anything that they feel is somehow unfair. And then when we roll that out, it shows up as things like our new participatory budgeting of $20 million is going to those neighborhoods that were most affected by racist policies in the past. So the impact of the data that we choose, the neighborhoods we've left behind, and the policies, we make sure that everybody has a hand in making sure we're held accountable for that.
So just something quick, because talking about human cognitive biases, I just wanted to mention that actually I find fascinating the opportunities that AI brings to help us humans make less biased decisions. And that's actually one research area that we're working on, which is the other side of the coin of algorithmic bias. So on the one hand, the algorithms might be biased, but on the other hand, we are very biased. In many cases, the algorithms are biased because we are biased. So we're actually developing human plus AI systems where the AI system helps us be more aware of our own biases.
Well, I was going to add a third ingredient, which was more about politics and regulation. And I was going to ask you about the dark sides of algorithms and a bit of AI in terms of diversity and inclusion, but in a part or inside, it's humans. I mean, if a guy as Jeff and I design an algorithm, we will think that everyone is like you and me if we're not a bit open-minded. And we can, I don't know, we can destroy everything.
Yeah, so I wanted to also comment on something that Jeff said before when he was talking a little bit about the stereotype of who works in technology. You were saying, they are introverted guys, basically, right? So I think one of the changes that is happening and needs to happen in the technology sector, and particularly in AI, because within technology, AI has even less diversity, is actually to be a lot more inclusive and diverse in the sector itself. And as you probably know, one of the most basic areas of lack of diversity is gender diversity, and there has been significant changes in a lot of universities in different countries in the world in how computer science is taught to be more inclusive, because it's not just what you teach, it's also how you teach it. And one of the key fundamental changes is framing technology and the computer science classes, like say programming or operating systems, from the perspective of being a tool to solve social problems, as opposed to the beauty of programming for the beauty, of the program. And by having this stronger social and contextual focus, actually a lot of the computer science departments are able to attract much more diverse students, including a lot more female students, which in turn will hope that will have positive impact,
And I will ask you something now. I don't know. Oh, you're in the mic. Whoa, that's fantastic. Sorry, I was going to say we're 5 minutes left, 5.5. So if any of you want to bring some question, I will ask you something that you said, but let's listen you first.
Oh, thank you. My name is Tzvi Weinstein. I'm from the Israeli Smart City Institute in Israel. I have a difficult question to your people.
To me?
To all of you.
To them.
Yeah.
I'm safe.
The topic is the connection between technology and inclusion.
Yeah.
To me, it sounds like two people are going to get married. On one side is technology, and on the other side is the inclusion. I think that this marriage is going to have quite a lot of difficulties.
Really?
Difficulties.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Why?
Maybe at the end it will be divorce. And what I mean is that following. For me, inclusion means all the people. The topic of this conference is City for the People. We don't leave anyone behind. And I was talking to many of the booths here on the exhibition. Most of them are aiming for the, let's say, upper middle class and above things. They are not talking about low income population. I used to be for a period of 40 years nationally in charge of what we call project renewal for disadvantaged neighborhoods in Israel. And I did a lot of things to give an opportunity and access to those lower income people. For instance, I used to collect used computers from banks, insurance company, and other sources, and deliver it to family and children who didn't have it. Or we pay a lot of attention for employment, to give skills to the people.
So the question is really if we have to be so pessimistic or we can be more optimistic, and let's see what they think about it, because I hope you're wrong and there's no divorce.
It's not just to be optimistic. I mean, it's just to do things.
Of course.
To leave politics aside. On the first day, there were 2 mayors, and I asked questions. They didn't reply me because everything is politics. I personally against it.
Okay.
I am looking for the person,
Absolutely.
for the people.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
a
I'll
polity.
take that
We've
one.
got someone, a polity. I hope she can answer. Jen, it's your turn.
100% we are focused on those who have been left behind in the digital divide. We know that there are a lot of people with great skills, and that's wonderful. Our incubator called the Vision Lab is focused in our poorest community, and those entrepreneurs are coming out of that community. Our libraries have a Tech2Go project where you can check out a laptop and a high Wi-Fi hotspot for 6 months for free. We give away thousands of computers. We gave away 18,000 free 5-year Wi-Fi hotspots during the pandemic. We have a Peace Corps for Los Angeles called the Angelino Corps, where we hire 400 students every year, train them in technology skills, put them in community centers and our senior centers to teach other people skills and be there. We are 100% focused on making sure everybody is included.
Great, thank you. I hope that's a good answer. There is another question there.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Claudia Laumans from the Netherlands. I tend to feel that you put a lot of stress on accessibility of technology, of software and AI being non-biased as far as that is possible. I think that will never fire you from, I mean, if everything is accessible and everybody can access technology and it's to a certain degree, still you will have to also, I feel, make sure that people use it, and make sure that people use it is more than just saying, okay, it's accessible and you can use it.
Absolutely.
You have to make that extra step and involve personally, I feel, people to actually use it. I feel that is an element that has not been part of the discussion
Well,
yet.
it's a bit, I presume, I don't know if you can help me on this, but I presume it has a bit of connection with what we were saying about the literacy programs and how to make it available in terms of this is not only existing, this is existing for you, and we will teach you how to. But I don't know, how do you see it, Jeff?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it comes out to what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and whose problem is it, right? And the gentleman before you was starting to actually provide the answer to your own question of how you make that marriage work. The question is, who are you ultimately serving, right? And are you developing the products that and services that are addressing these big global challenges where the vast majority of the individuals that are impacted of those are low income and traditionally marginalized? And if you're creating products and services for those people, then ultimately they are your customer. The demand is built in, right? But if we continue to simply have the market speak to where the money is, if we don't have government step in to fill the gaps in the market, if we don't encourage more social entrepreneurship that looks holistically at how to, have sustainable sources of revenue, then we're in trouble. And so it comes down at the end of the day to what we are creating technology for, and if technology is a means to an end, and that end that we want to see as an equitable future, then I feel confident. If that's not the scenario, I'm worried about the years ahead.
Any other opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of using technology, of course, is a cost-benefit analysis. If the value that is providing me, because I don't have to go to an office and wait 3 hours online, and I can do it from my computer in 30 seconds, obviously there is a big value, right? But it has to be designed properly. It has to be easy to use. It has to be, in many cases, invisible. I think the most successful technology is a technology that is invisible.
Absolutely.
But having said all of this, we also have to acknowledge that we are humans. We are a social species, and we need social connection. And for certain demographic groups, actually, the value of the transaction is not the transaction itself, is actually the interaction. And we've seen this, for example, with the banking sector in Spain, where most of the banks or many banks are closing a lot of offices. You can do all the transactions from home, but actually certain demographic groups, they actually like going there. They like having the social interaction. They like talking about their health, to the person working in the bank. So I think a real human-centric approach also needs to recognize such a reality where we really crave human connection, and there are certain groups, particularly the elderly, that have very isolated, lonely lives. That's the reality of it.
Absolutely. And it's pretty connected to what Carlo was saying about the weak ties and close ties. I mean, we all like, in a way, to go to work and see physically people, touch them and say, how are you going? And I mean, the 2 dimensions doesn't help for that. No. And Nerea, I think you wanted to say something, and we'll finish the session.
Very quick.
Yeah.
Yes, that I also see there's still a lack of dissemination on technology. So during these years, I have given a lot of talks about artificial intelligence, not in the sense of new gadgets or new algorithms, but what it's behind, how it works, and also because I think it's very important that people feel included, represented,
Absolutely.
and to hear different voices talking about technology from the social inclusion, of course, point of view, but also from people who speak differently. And in my case, it has been really successful. And I just want to put an example that I just was included into a TV show here in the public TV.
Orbita
Laika, yeah. And it's the first time and there is a technology collaborator. And we have heard a lot about science, physics, maths. So why not technology? So maybe there's also this.
My last ingredient, which we'll not address, but we kind of address it right now, was ecosystem to empower community involvement, which is pretty much that. Apart from connecting the guys on the top, the technicians with the other ones in the cities and all that, also connecting the communities so that they make it work. Well, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to have you again. Thank you very much for being here, for attending, for your questions. It was great. Thanks to Jeff Merrit, Head of Urban Transformation at the World Economic Forum. Thank you, Nuria Oliver, Director and Co-founder at ELLIS Unit Alicante Foundation. Thank you very much to Jeanne Holm. She's the Deputy Mayor of the City of Los Angeles. To Nerea, Luis, Artificial Intelligence Led at TechFest. And also to Carlo, who had to jump out to another session 5 minutes ago, and he's Director of the MIT Senseable Lab. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.